Yeah, hi, this is Dr. Bill O'Neill. I'm the medical director for the Center of Structural Heart Disease at Henry Ford Hospital, and I'm an interventional cardiologist. Right, the CoreValve trial was the pivotal trial done in the United States by Medtronic to get approval for their new percutaneous heart valve called CoreValve. They included a number of patients that were called extreme risk in a single center prospective registry. This is a break from the FDA tradition of requiring a randomized trial. The registry was against what's called optimal performance criteria, or OPC. So basically a historical control group of patients who had severe stenosis. And they improved the endpoint, the predicted endpoint of death or rehospitalization at 1 year was supposed to be about 40%, and their major endpoint was 20%. So there was a significant reduction in the major endpoint. The mortality rate was quite low. The rate of stroke was actually very low compared to historical control and compared to other valves. And so I think clinicians really are favorably inclined to think of this valve as a very effective treatment for patients with severe aortic stenosis who are at extreme risk for bypass surgery. It was under 2%, and I think that it's really hard to do a comparison with other studies. The partner trial had a higher stroke rate, but again, different patient population, different time frames, so I think it's really difficult to extrapolate. Now, the post-procedure regurgitation was less than previous studies, and I think that probably is a very firm finding. Importantly, in the Edwards trial, when patients had moderate aortic regurgitation, there was a mortality difference over long-term follow-up, whereas with the CoreValve, they've got some provocative data suggesting that the degree of aortic regurgitation lessens over time, and more importantly, the degree of mild to moderate aortic regurgitation did not appear to have a prognostic impact at 1 year. So I think that's something, that, from my standpoint, the one major thing that I've got out of this trial is that there may be a difference in rates of aortic regurgitation between the valves, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to look at in the future in the U.S. Right now, we only have the Edwards valve to use, but when we have other valves to use, we're going to have to decide as clinicians which are better for individual patients, and things like rate of stroke, rate of paravalvular leak, rate of pacemaker implantation are going to be very important in our decision process. The heart block data was 22% of the patients developed heart block requiring a pacemaker, and I think those numbers are kind of in line with other Medtronic trials. The rate of heart block is definitely higher with a CoreValve than it is with the Edwards valve. Yeah, currently the Edwards valve is commercially available in the United States, requires femoral vessels that are 7 millimeters in diameter for the smaller valve and 8 millimeters for the larger valve. For the CoreValve, the French size is 18 French, so the femoral vessels need to be 6 French. So you have a substantial advantage. In small vessels, the CoreValve is definitely more deliverable. So in particularly elderly women who tend to have small femoral arteries may have a substantial benefit. Now, in the future, the Edwards valves that are currently undergoing investigation will have smaller French sizes, but currently, if this valve becomes available and usable in the United States next year, then I think that there will be an advantage. In Europe, when the old Edwards valve was compared to the CoreValve, there was a substantial shift in market share immediately from Edwards to CoreValve, whereas when the smaller French sizes with the new valves became available, it sort of became a 50-50 market share between Edwards and CoreValve. No, I think the same dynamics would occur. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 1 millimeter difference of size of the vessels really is a huge difference. There's a lot of women that have 6 millimeter arteries, and we're really petrified to try to stretch those with the larger diameter Edwards sheaths. For that reason, in our practice right now, more than half of the patients are getting either transaortic or transapical valves rather than transfemoral. Now, those are more morbid. They require longer hospital stays, tend to be more complicated than transfemoral. So tomorrow, if I had an 18 French sheath, I would instantly use it in people that have smaller vessels. I have no clue when they're gonna have it released. I mean, they haven't really told us. Their trials are still ongoing. They've finished recruitment in the surgical trial partner 2. That's going to require a 1-year follow-up. You know, that study is not going to be completed and ready for analysis until the fall of next year. So I assume that it's going to be at least until the fall of next year before they go to panel and get approval for their new valve. So I think certainly in 2014, we're only going to have the current Edwards valve available. So I think in the short term, if Medtronic can start selling their valve early in 2014, that they will have a significant market shift. The other thing that I think we have to understand is that the second generation valve, the Sapien XT, still has a lot of trouble with aortic insufficiency. So there's going to be an advantage still, I think, with Medtronic. If people start perceiving that there's less aortic insufficiency with Medtronic, that may be another reason for people to shift to that valve. It's all going to be weighed against the problem with heart plaque that occurs in more Medtronic patients. So I think it's going to be quite a dynamic field. The next generation valve that Edwards have is very promising, the third generation. In that valve, the Sapien 3, does seem to have a solution for paravalvular leak and also has a very small French size for delivery. So I think that valve is very exciting. But again, the regulatory path, I think, is just incredibly cumbersome, and I would have no clue how long it will be before that valve was available in the U.S. Yeah, so the other news that became available at TCT was that Edwards announced that the FDA had told them that there wasn't going to be an FDA panel requirement. Typically what happens is that the FDA has an advisory panel that gets together. They meet usually on a quarterly basis, so they would probably have a panel sometime in February. The panel would have met, they would have come up with some conclusions. Presumably they would have recommended approval, and then it would have been probably mid to late year before the valve got available for commercial sale. Without the need for that, the FDA basically could tell them in the very near future that they would be available. So I think that they've gained at least 6 to 8 months of time by having that decision made. And honestly, I think it is going to be a huge impact because they will be able to market against the old existing Edwards valve, which I think is going to be seen as an inferior product compared to the CoreValve.